Hey folks, welcome back to the Dice Tower preview. I'm Mark, and today I'm taking a look at Hard City. Hard City is brought to you from Hex Studios. It plays in about 60 minutes for 2 to 5 players, ages 12 and up. You take on the role of one of the officers of the Hard City Police Department, and one player will take on the role of Dr. Zero, trying to thwart this police department's actions while he unleashes his mutants upon the city. So this is a semi-cooperative game where it's all versus one. Setup can be very different based on the scenario you choose. Your objectives can change, your paths to victory can be different. However, there are some generic things you want to set up for every game. First, you're going to decide who is going to play Dr. Zero. You're going to give Dr. Zero the event deck, the chaos cards, and It's Not Over Yet deck. And finally, Dr. Zero takes all the mutant figures. The remaining players will play the police officers. Each player will receive a player card showing the officer's stats, receive a health marker and AP tokens, as well as skill cards and your miniature. Now, if you're playing in a 2-player game, one player will play all the officers and one player plays Dr. Zero. Now you're going to take the main game board and set it up in the middle of the table. And what you're going to do is look at your scenario card and flip it over. There's a series of grids on the back. So every game could have a very different setup to begin with. What you're going to do is draw randomly from the event deck, and that card will determine which grid that you'll use to set up. And these grids are going to set up numerous types of things. You could set up where civilians start. You set up where the helicopter starts. You might set up where manhole covers are or where flaming barrels are. But there's just lots of different things based on the scenario you choose. Now you're going to set up your victory point track, which is order and chaos. You're going to take the tokens that show order and chaos and put them at the starting point of this board. This is where you'll be tracking victory points throughout the game. Now take the mutant extermination track and put it next to the board as well, and place a marker starting at 0. Next, take the crate tokens and the dice and put them near the board for everyone to have access to as well. Then all the officers are going to take their skill cards and shuffle them up and place them next to their character sheets. You also need to place the I'm out of ammo markers near the board for access during the game. Now after you have the scenario all set up and you have everyone assigned an officer and Dr. Zero ready to go, you can begin the game. Quick note on player count, there are some different variances of how the officers work based on 3, 4, and 5 players. But in general, everybody gets an officer or even multiple officers for playing against Dr. Zero. Now, as I said before, Hard City is a scenario-based game, and your setup and game objectives are going to be very different based on the scenario, as well as a lot of the gameplay will be built into that scenario. However, there is some main gameplay elements that you will do for each scenario. The round and how that functions and who goes first and so forth. So let's take a quick look at how a round works. Each round is divided into 2 phases. The first phase is the event phase. And the first thing you're going to do here is draw an event card. You'll notice the grid pattern again, which relates back to the playing board. There were symbols on this card, and these symbols directly relate back to the scenario. The scenario will tell you what the board gets populated with. You could be doing things like putting civilians out in harm's way potentially, and placing loot crates for the police officers to find new goodies to use throughout the game. Then Dr. Zero is going to draw from his chaos deck. He draws as many cards as there are officers in the game. Then finally, the officers get to restore their AP points. These are their action points, and typically they all have 5. So these are the points that allows them to do actions throughout the game. Next up is the action phase, and this is where Dr. Zero and the officers get to take turns. Now, in the officers, you get to collectively decide who goes first. There's not a set order every time. And you're going to use those action points. You're going to spend them. You don't have to spend them all, but whoever does go, they can't go again if they haven't spent all their points. And then Dr. Zero will go after each officer. And that will happen until all the officers have gone and Dr. Zero has taken his last turn. Now, each officer has several basic actions they can tap into, and they can do these as many times as they want as long as they have action points to pay for them. Now, the first one we're going to look at is movement, and this costs 1 AP. What you're going to do is you can move 1 to 2 spaces in really any direction you want. There are obstacles that can block your way, things like cars or crushed cars. You just can't move through those spaces. You can move through spaces with civilians or mutants though. However, if you move through a space with mutants, regardless of how many mutants are on that space, you're going to take 1 damage. It just doesn't matter if there's 10 or 1, you're still going to only take the 1 damage. Next we have the shooting action, which again requires 1 AP. Now some things of note first. There really is no line of sight. You don't really have to worry about that unless the scenario calls for it. Also, you can't shoot if you're in a space with a mutant, and you can't shoot into a space that has a civilian or one of your fellow officers. So you have to be careful about those things. There are some things that allow you to still shoot from your space if the mutant in your space is stunned. And we'll talk about how that happens in a minute. But generally, you have to have a clear shot is what they're saying here. But you can target any space on the board, which is really nice. You're going to roll those dice and you're looking for the explodey bits. And the explodes will determine how many hits you get on a mutant. It takes 2 hits to actually kill a mutant. Or if you get a single hit, then the mutant is stunned and you just lay the mutant down on the board. Now, there is some danger here of running out of ammo. So if you roll the 2 dice and you get 2 exclamation points, boom, you run out of ammo and you can no longer do any of the shooting actions. Well, that is until you reload. Again, this is an action. It costs you 1 action point to reload your weapon. Now you might be wondering, these are officers, right? They should have some practice at the shooting range. What if they aim? That brings our next action. They have an aimed shot. And really, this is a thing where you spend 2 action points, but it gives you an automatic kill against any mutant. Now we have the close combat attack. Again, this is going to cost you 1 AP. And really this is for those instances where you're in a square with a mutant. And a couple things of note. I mean, the officer has a couple choices. He could move out of the space. Again, this would require him to lose a health point. But really this close combat is for those instances where you want to stun the mutants. Because in close combat you cannot kill them. You're going to roll 1 single dice, and if you get a hit, then you stun them and flip them on their side. Now there are some special abilities, might be some weapons and things that allow you to do more than that, but in general, the close combat is just for stunning these mutants. Now the officers have a few other actions that they can do. One of the freebie actions is loot crates. You can just pick them up off the board and place them on your sheet. Does not cost an action point to do so. Escorting civilians. Again, that's a free action. However, there are skills that each of the officers have that may require action points, and it will vary greatly based on the officer and what skill cards that you may have chosen throughout the game. Now, there are all these loot crates on the board, and they are various items that you'll have throughout the game. There's all kinds of weapons and different things. Now, as you pick them up, you'll accumulate them. You can have as many of these loot crates as you want, but you have the option as one of your last basic actions to give this equipment to your fellow officers. Again, costs you 1 AP. And again, there's no limit to how many of these you can carry. However, all the loot crates are a one-time use. Now, after the officer has taken all his actions or whatever he chooses to play, he doesn't have to use all those actions. Then Dr. Zero gets to go. And Dr. Zero basically is playing cards out of his chaos deck. He has 3 different types of cards. He's got instant, action, and the action of these is above and beyond his basic actions. But he has action cards and he has reactionary cards. So the first thing he's going to do is play an instant card if he has one. And a couple examples here. The thing that happened in one of the games I played was that most of my mutants were down, and this card came in super handy. Undefeated minions. The instant here is all stunned mutants on the board are no longer stunned. They all stand back up, which is awesome. Doom and Gloom. This is another instant, but you can choose an officer, any officer, to lose 2 AP, 2 action points down for their next turn, which is great as well. So there's many types of instant cards in this deck. Next, Dr. Zero can do one of 3 things. First, he has the choice to draw another chaos card. If he does, that's the end of his turn and the next officer goes. Or he can choose to play the action of an action card, only an action card, it'll say action. And for an example, gather for the kill. You choose a space with an officer or civilian and move all mutants from adjacent spaces to that space. So this is where you use the action, the text action of the card. Dr. Zero also has a special chaos card. These special chaos cards are directly related to the scenario. And in scenario 1, in this demo copy, Mayhem on the Streets, this special card will move the helicopter to any space on the board. And why that's important is because the police officers are trying to get the civilians out of the area via the helicopter, while you, Dr. Zero, and the mutants are trying to destroy all the civilians and prevent them from leaving. Then finally, Dr. Zero has the option of playing 2 of his basic actions. And the way that works is he has to still play a card, and he will activate the basic actions at the bottom. Now there are 3 possibilities. The first one being spawning. He can spawn mutants back onto the board, and usually the scenario will say what zone mutants can spawn in. And in this particular instance, the Sinister Laugh, he can spawn 6 new mutants out to the board for this one card. He also has the option of moving, but he can only move 1 mutant. And he has the option of attacking. Again, you can only attack with 1 mutant from this card. Now, all the cards have different basic actions built into them. You might have 4, 2, and 2. It might be 1, 2, and 4. It's just going to be varied greatly. Now, movement is very much like the officers. You can move 1 to 2 spaces. But attacking, the mutants generally only do 1 damage. Now, if you move into a space that's got a civilian alone, then you just take the civilian out and it's toast. But if you move into a space with a civilian and officers, the officers get to decide where that damage goes. They could say, I'm going to take this one for the team, and they take 1 damage point on the officer. So what happens when an officer goes down? Well, he basically is stunned for the rest of the round, just like a mutant would be. However, he will stand back up after the round is over. But Dr. Zero gets to draw cards from the It's Not Over Yet deck. He gets to draw 2 cards and play 1 on the officer. And they do various bad things like reducing action points or reducing health. And they just not cards that you want played on your officers. All right, let's take a look again at the tracks. Why are these important? So you have the mutant extermination track. And once officers kill 10 mutants, then all the officers get to draw a skill card. And these skill cards are very important, and they do, again, various things throughout the game. So for instance, you might get a shotgun card, which now allows you to roll 3 dice every time you do a shooting attack. So this is a very important thing for the officers. It just allows them to evolve their characters and make them even more powerful to deal with the ever encroaching onslaught of the mutants. Now, how do you win the game? Really, the first one to reach 7 victory points wins, but how you get there is very different based on the scenario. Each scenario will outline how you gain these victory points. So for order and chaos. So order, you might be doing things like every civilian you get off the board or escapes, then you get a victory point. And for every 10 mutants you kill, you might get a victory point. And then for the chaos side, for every officer you drop to 0 health, you get a victory point. And for every civilian you kill, you get a victory point. So it's very much a race to that 7 points. But every scenario is going to be very different of how each side achieves these scores. All right, folks, just a reminder once again, this has been a Dice Tower paid preview, and everything you've seen here has been in prototype form. So some of the artwork and rules still might be in flux, so keep a close eye on the campaign for any changes. Now that said, I really like the thematic nature of this game, and I love the scenario setup and how every game can be really different based on number of players, how many officers are in the game, the setup, and the game mechanics based on the scenario. And the victory point condition wins. It just really changes up the game dramatically, and I really liked that. So if this looks like a game that might be of interest to you, I'm sure they would appreciate your support. So I think that's it from us, and until next time, we'll see you at the table.
So much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching the Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool Stuff, in stock. Check them out at coolstuffinc.com.